Welcome to Addicted to Busy, the podcast specifically for overachieving property managers who are dying for a little more work-life balance in their lives. Each week, we dismantle all the BS that holds us back. You'll learn how to nix those tricky, self-sabotaging habits so that you have the time, energy, and motivation to create what you really want in life. If you're looking to shift from overcommitted to overjoyed, this is the podcast for you. Let's do this. Now, your host, Anna Haviliana.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Addicted to Busy. I am so excited to record this podcast as we are in the start of a new year. And by the time that you are hearing this, I will have actually started at a new property. An opportunity within my company to take on a property that was twice as big with more than twice the staff came up, and I put my name in and I got it. So I am very, very excited for the challenge. And I know that 2025 is going to look very different than 2024 did. Because this is an internal opportunity, I did have a chance to go and tour the site and get to meet the team and basically just see how the site's performing. And there is some work to be done with occupancy processes, maybe even some reputation management. And so with that comes more moving parts, more complexity, but also from my standpoint, there's also more potential to make an impact, both to the ownership group and then most importantly, the people who live there. And I know that there's going to be somewhat of a steep learning curve, but that's part of what makes it exciting for me. It's a chance to grow as a leader and also really put everything that I've learned so far to the test. So I'm hoping that this next opportunity is going to push me. I hope that it will also expand my capacity and make me a better manager. But when I really think about this next role and this next step in my career, it's not just a professional opportunity. To me, it's also a personal one. It is a chance to really practice what I've been preaching on this podcast for the last few years and make sure that I'm in line with the messages that I send about balance, self-awareness, learning to work smarter and not harder. And if I'm being honest, historically, I've had a really tough time with this, right? When I get faced with a challenge or with something that I don't necessarily know how to do, my instinct has always been to go all in, work as hard as I possibly can, even when it comes at my own expense. And here's the thing is that in the past, I wouldn't really even realize that it was happening until I was already too far into burnout. Now, in my research on burnout, one of the trickiest things that I've learned is that it does sneak up on you. It's not like a light switch that you can just turn and off. It's more like a dimmer. Okay, so sometimes we don't really recognize that we're in burnout until we are completely drained. But if we really pay attention, our bodies, our moods, and our energy levels, they're all giving us signals long before we hit the wall. For me, it's been about learning how to look for and read those signals and then act on them before it's too late. And that is much easier said than done, especially when you are in the thick of things. When this opportunity came up, my initial reaction was excitement. I had been telling my manager for a while that I was ready for a bigger challenge and that I was starting to feel a little bit stagnant in my current role. So when the offer came through, I was pumped because it felt like the exact kind of next step that I had been asking for. But after the excitement settled, something else creeped in, and that was worry. I started replaying the tape of my past experiences and started assuming that my life was going to look exactly like it did the last time I took on a big challenge, right? So I started imagining late nights, constant stress, my phone going off at all hours of the night, and then ultimately burning myself out. And thinking about that is what actually gave me some pause because that was the exact problem was that I was assuming that my past experiences were going to repeat themselves in this next new chapter, right? It's kind of funny how our brains work like that. We can get so caught up in what happened before that we forget that we're not the same person that we were back then. I've grown. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about burnout and what it means to approach work in a healthier and more sustainable way. So instead of letting those old assumptions take the wheel, I'm also looking at this as an opportunity to get a true gut check, right? This isn't about just proving to myself that I can handle a bigger role. It's about confirming whether I did or did not actually learn the lessons from the first time that I burned myself out, right? Am I able to recognize when I'm pushing too hard? Can I set my boundaries and then actually stick to them? Am I going to let myself rest without guilt? So, those are the questions that I'm carrying into this new chapter. And I'm hopeful that the answers are going to be a yes. But if I'm being honest, I know myself and I know that I'm probably going to fall back into some old patterns. And it's going to take some real intentionality, reflection, tons of trial and error. And that's okay, right? Growth is a process, it is not a one time event. When I work with clients and we're focusing on time management, one of the things that I will have them fill out every week is a weekly recap of how they use their time. And this is something that I still do for myself to this day. So, the reason why we want to do a weekly recap is because if we start to notice that we have patterns at work or even patterns in our personal life that are either not working for us or keeping us far away from our goals, we have to stop and look at what's happening. Otherwise, without any type of reflection, we're just going to keep repeating the same things over and over again. There was this quote, and I cannot remember exactly where I heard it, but it's something to the effect of reflection turns experience into insight. Or maybe it was intuition, one of the two. So, reflection turns experience into insight. And sure, you can think about how your week went or how you chose to spend your time. But when you really sit down and write it out, and when you really sit down and ask yourself some intentional questions, you will almost always find ways in which you either gave your time away when you shouldn't have, or you will certainly find where you procrastinated. If you're lucky, you'll also find out why. And if you're having fun with it, you can even just get curious about ways to be more efficient. One thing that I'm really trying to teach people right now is how to use keyboard shortcuts and using Excel for file naming to really cut down on some of our mundane tasks and get through them quicker and quicker, right? Anyway, so when we do this weekly recap, by the name itself, you can tell that we are reviewing just 7 days. As I'm entering this next chapter in my career, I actually have been trying to recap the larger seasons as a manager and what I have learned from them. One of the reasons why I love journaling and personal development work so much is that you have a written record of what it was that you were struggling with at the time. And if you have a regular habit of doing this type of work, eventually you will also have answers to how to remedy the things that come up. So, in preparation for this next role, one of the steps that I took was I actually went back and I read some of my old journals. And I just got curious, browsed through a few of them, and tried to see if I could pick up on what were the things that I didn't know at the time of writing those entries that I know now. And based on what I read, the one thing that I kept coming back to was sleep. Now, as you're listening, I know it can be easy to roll your eyes and say, yeah, yeah, I know, I've heard that. And I get that, but I think that's sometimes what our problem is when we're looking for ways to be more efficient or ways to balance out work-life balance is a lot of times I notice that people are looking for something new or something that hasn't been heard before. But the reality is that it truly comes back to the basics: sleep, nutrition, connection. Now, one of the reasons why I'm focusing on sleep is because it literally affects everything else. For me, I notice that when I am sleep deprived or when I haven't rested well, I tend to make really bad decisions as it pertains to my diet. And that affects everything else. If I'm not eating well balanced meals, I end up suffering from energy crashes, and it's much harder for me to concentrate because my body's trying to regulate, all of the either sugar or flour that I've consumed. And that also leads into the fact that sleep and diet affects my mood, which affects how I interact with people, which affects how I handle my staff, which affects how it reflects to the residents, our vendors, our ownership groups. And so ultimately, sleep also affects performance. When I am well rested, I will make fewer mistakes. When I am well rested, I will have more patience. And those are all things that not only contribute to running a smoother office, but also just enjoying the job in general. Back in the day when my overworking was at its absolute worst, one of the things that I struggled with was I would find myself in bed into the early hours of the morning watching Netflix. And it just kind of became this really frustrating cycle because I'd stay up all night watching shows, and then I'd tell myself, okay, I'm going to go to work. And then as soon as I get back, I'm going to get caught up on sleep. But that never actually happened. And what I started to figure out, it took me years to put these pieces together, was that the reason why I was staying up so late at night watching Netflix is because I had done nothing for myself during the day. At this particular company that I was at, it was, it was just grueling. I remember waking up in the mornings and just crying because I didn't want to go into work. But I'd work a full day, I'd come home, I would have a meal, and then I would just log on to the computer from, 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. So at this point, I've worked primarily most of the day with a small break in the evening for dinner. I wasn't seeing friends and family. I, barely had time to take care of myself. So once I was done and I crawled into bed, Netflix became pretty much the only source of joy or reprieve for me. And so I would just stay up all night watching different shows. At the time that this was going on, I would wear my work as a badge of honor. I would boast about how many hours I was working. And at the time, I really thought that it made me look like I was a dedicated employee or that I was needed or that I was important in some way. But in hindsight, I really no longer have respect for people who boast about how much they work because to me, that indicates that you have prioritized work over your family, your friends, your hobbies, and your interests. But at the time that I was in that mindset, I think the other reason why I was boasting about how much I was working was because I subconsciously knew that this was a choice, but I couldn't really yet figure out how to get out of it. One thing that I do fairly consistently is I track my habits. I usually have 5 habits that I'm tracking at a time. I've been doing this since, oh gosh, I don't remember when, but I have records and records of years of habits that I have tracked. And I want to say it was back in maybe 2019 or 2020 when I started tracking my sleep habits. And doing that consistently really allowed me to just look at the data of how much I was sleeping or not sleeping, and then witness how that trickled into the rest of my life. And I feel so blessed going into this next experience and this next chapter, already having a really solid sleep routine. Now, the other thing that is great is that going into this next experience, if I start to notice that I'm not getting enough sleep, that is going to be an indicator to myself right away that there is something that needs my attention, whether that is how much time I'm spending at work or how well I'm eating, or if I'm over or understimulated with social events or the hobbies that I have outside of work. I'm still working on my digital hygiene, if that's what you want to call it, as it pertains to how much time I spend on my phone. I have a pretty good habit of leaving my phone in my living room instead of bringing it into my bedroom. And that's good for 2 things. So, first of all, I already know that if I bring my phone into my bedroom with me, there is a 99% chance that I am going to turn into a scrolly-poly and just sit on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook and get lost in all of the funny reels and clips. I know this about myself, so I have to do what I can and change my environment so I don't get pulled into that habit. But the second benefit to leaving my phone in the living room is actually, you know what? There's three things. One of them is that when I sleep at night, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can't see the time. And that's good for me because if I'm aware of how much sleep I'm not getting, that also affects me the next day. But then third, I actually have to physically get out of my bed to turn the alarm off, which means that I very rarely sleep in past the time that I wanted to get up. So for these next few weeks, I am going to zone in on really making sure that I am prioritizing and following through with great sleep patterns. A couple of other things that I've done to get ready for this next chapter is I actually gave my friends a heads up in advance. You've probably heard me say this many times before, but I have a really great community of friends and family in the Twin Cities. And we get together frequently and we communicate frequently. And there's a couple group chats that I'm in that they just, they take some time. So I sent a message to those friends, basically just giving them a heads up in advance that said, hey, I love you. And I know that in the next few weeks, you may want to connect or want to get together. And I'm just not going to be able to do that for a while. But I love you. And I'll see you on the flip side when I, come out of getting settled here. And I'm fortunate in that my friends are supportive, they understand, and they know my quirks probably better than I do. And they've seen me through various stages of my career. And I think that they trust that I'm taking care of myself and they support me in that endeavor. So again, I'm lucky in the sense that I have a group of friends that really allows me to set my boundaries and they honor them. And it feels good to have them in my corner. So one of the habits that I'm trying to get out of is oftentimes, like I mentioned before, when we're overworking, we can't always recognize it before it's too late. And I remember earlier in my career as a manager, I would work and work and work and work, and then there would always be one day, I'd say it would probably happen like once a quarter or once every 4 months, where I would set my alarm for work with all intentions of going into work, but my body would just say, no, like we're staying in bed. We're not doing anything today. And now that I can see that, I know that I have a responsibility to figure out what's causing that and try to prevent it in advance. So one of the things I'm going to play around with is maybe building in some personal half days in advance to help be more proactive in giving my body and the mind the rest that it needs so that it doesn't become an emergency where now I'm having to call in sick because I'm just physically exhausted. So I've talked a lot about myself on this podcast, and typically I try to use analogies or talk about other people's experiences or talk about books that I have read. But my goal here is that as I'm processing through this and sharing it with you, I hope that you'll find what resonates with you and see how it applies to your own life. Again, we've talked about doing a weekly recap, but I think it can also be really powerful and insightful to recap your larger seasons as a manager and take the time to deduce what you have learned from those seasons and try and build upon it. I know for me, it is going to be super fun at the end of this year, going into 2026, to look back on this episode and check myself and see if I actually did it, if I truly learned the lessons from the lessons that I learned the hard way a few years ago. So thank you again for listening, everyone. I hope that your new year is off to an amazing start. As always, I love you. Keep going.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Addicted to Busy. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.